IGN's History of Awesome, a year-by-year breakdown of big events that shape pop culture. Today we're covering the big one, Y2K. A great year for the Nintendo 64 as we got both Majora's Mask and Perfect Dark. On PC we were playing Baldur's Gate 2 and Diablo 2. Everything is awesome, so let's get this discussion started.
Hi, I'm Jared Petty, and welcome to History of Awesome Y2K edition. Joined by these luminaries over here, History of Awesome for the year 2000.
Oh, my computer!
We're all gonna die!
We're all gonna die!
Cats and dogs living together!
It's only 2 digits. It's gonna be 00. It's gonna take us
hysteria.
1900.
All
Kids,
the nukes
that's
will launch.
old people humor right there. Year 2000, an amazing year for pop culture. Year that gave us Baldur's Gate 2. Year that gave us Bryan Singer's X-Men.
Deus Ex. Awesome.
Yeah, gave us Deus Ex.
And Majora's Mask.
Diablo 2.
Yep.
Marvel
Also-
vs. Capcom 2 and the greatest character select screen of all time.
Also, a little thing called the PlayStation 2.
Yeah,
that too.
that.
But let's start here with something absolutely perfect. Perfectly Dark, that is.
Oh!
Talk about Perfect Dark
Yeah.
for the N64. Brennan, you played a lot of Perfect Dark. What makes it wonderful?
I was always a Perfect Dark guy over GoldenEye. I know everyone, there's kind of divisive whether you love GoldenEye or Perfect Dark. I was Perfect Dark probably because of the setting. I wasn't a James Bond fan, which I was like sci-fi. So having this like crazy, like Ghost in the Shell inspired, Blade Runner-esque, like sci-fi conspiracy stuff, it was a really competent shooter on the Nintendo 64 of all things.
Yeah, it was a very refined shooter compared to GoldenEye. GoldenEye's a lot of fun, but it's very, very rough around the edges. Perfect Dark, you can tell they kind of went through and gave it a second gloss, figured out what worked control-wise and level design-wise compared to what had happened before. It's a much less experimental game in many ways, and I think a lot more playable today. You guys, Vince, what do you think?
Well, actually, what I think is cool about it is that I think Perfect Dark is an example of when a studio gets their core, their base under them. You know, they've done all the the development groundwork, right? And then they're like, okay, we know what works, we know what doesn't. Now that we have a confident core, we can kind of put in laptop miniguns and like and like the Farsight, which sees through and shoots through walls. I feel like it was that, yeah, totally, yeah. It's like a wall hack, but like in a gun. And I loved seeing that how they had this confidence in what existed already, and then they just started getting crazy off of it. I mean, and what I think is amazing too is that today, Perfect Dark wouldn't have been made. It would have instead been GoldenEye 2. Like that's what it would have been today. They'd like, let's take the name and build on it. But they're like, no, let's take what we made and then like make original IPs out of it.
And they did a wonderful job with that. It was a great dorm game.
Also,
4 people in a room. Yeah.
It made perfect use of the expansion pack. One of the later games to use it, and it like used to the brim. It had multiplayer with 4 people plus up to 8 simulants.
Yeah.
They all had their own AI you could program. You could have like evil sims, pacifist sims, and like the way you could have multiplayer maps on that and be able to choose your selection of items. You can choose your loadout, choose shields, choose your music playlist. It had just such a crazy amount of detail into it.
Yeah, it's a really kind of a crazy lost idea, the whole RAM card expansion. You imagine being able to like just buy something off the shelf.
It's suicide now.
Plug it into the side of your Xbox and suddenly it's Xboxier. I mean, that would be... But it worked really well for games like this and in this situation. This also represents an interesting time in history. The last real moment, the Nintendo was the dominant force in console first-person shooters.
Yeah, that's right.
That's where you went for it.
Nope, it hasn't happened again.
It had great AI, it had great mission objectives that scaled to your difficulty. It also had counter-op, which I've never seen in another
That's right, I forgot about that.
It was a kind of a wonky mode where you have someone playing Joanna Dark, and then somebody playing a random goon in the level with like half their health.
Yeah.
And they would just try anything they could to stop you. And I remember playing with my friend. We were always playing the one where we had to protect the president in Air Force One. And so the moment he started, it was like an escort mission gone wrong, where I had to save the president. He would just be like launching like grenades and like mines into his face, trying to blow him up. And it's like, how do you stop someone from doing that?
It's a wonderful game with a wonderful legacy. It is, it's an anachronism now. The way games controlled then is very different than what we expect now. Obviously, the way that level design has advanced or changed makes going back to it something you have to do with an self-awareness. But it's still a fun game.
It's also the end of right near the end of that golden era of the Rare Nintendo marriage, because it was 2002, just a short time later, this was one of the last games before Nintendo sold Rare to Microsoft.
There is that. Now, moving on, the game that really Ryan McCafferty, I think, is just ready to explode to talk about. Let's discuss the marvelous Deus Ex.
This is a game that Warren Spector, who is a just visionary, a renowned game designer, he's not been as much in the public eye these days, so younger viewers may be wondering who he is. And when I say things like Ultima Underworld, they might go, huh? Or even Looking Glass. I mean, Warren Spector was part of Looking Glass, which is possibly the single greatest collection of game development talent ever assembled, and it was a short-lived time. But Deus Ex was a game. It was a first-person shooter, but it was a dynamic one.
Right.
You could
an RPG in many ways.
You're right. It was a sort of an ultimate fusion of a role-playing game and a first-person shooter. It sort of coined. I don't know if it coined the term, but it sort of defined the term emergent gameplay.
Yeah.
Where you could approach the missions were all these giant open-world areas. There was
like
Hong Kong.
sandboxes.
Yeah, the sandbox. The first mission was what's the Statue of Liberty? Where's Ellis Island?
Ellis
Sorry,
Island,
I blanked on Ellis Island. And you had to, ultimately infiltrate your way in, and it's set in the future, and there are these humans have had these sort of implants. A lot of people know Deus Ex now from the reboot, Human Revolution, which was really good, and then there's a sequel to that coming. But the original Deus Ex with J.C. Denton was just it was a marvel. I mean, you could really play it stealthy. You could engage in conversations. You could shoot the heck out of everything. You could hack.
Right, and
you could do anything.
In a lot of ways, it's Metal Gear Solid 5-0.
Yeah, exactly. It's the beginning of that.
It is. It implanted that DNA into video game structure.
Yeah.
Also, if Daikatana gave us nothing else, it inadvertently gave us Deus Ex.
That's right. It was Ion Storm Austin, which was so. Famously, John Carmack, one of the creators of Doom, which of course covered in extensive detail back in our 1993 episode.
You mean John Romero, right?
What did I say?
Carmack.
Well, you're right. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Different John. Yeah, Romero started. He left id during the Quake development in 95. I guess that probably would have been because Quake was out in 96, and he founded Ion Storm. He was the golden boy at that time. He got Eidos to front millions of dollars. They got this high-rise studio in downtown Dallas for Romero's studio that set to work on in the penthouse.
Yeah.
Who set to work on Daikatana. But then part of it, there were two other studios. There was Tom Hall's studio that made really underrated RPG with the Quake engine called Anachronox, which we're not covering now. But and then Warren Spector was also part of this. And Warren's always been in and around Austin, and he set up a shop, Ion Storm Austin, and out of that came Deus Ex.
Yeah, and I think what's amazing about Deus Ex is that it's one of those first great examples of developers introducing elements of choice where there weren't those elements before. Like the idea of a first-person shooter. Like even games like Call of Duty feel like, compared to the shooter of yesteryear, feels actually open in a way. Shooters for years were literally walking down corridors.
Yeah,
they were just literally walking down corridors, shooting whatever popped up at you. And so this was a game that not only freed you from the corridor, but it gave you it gave you decisions to make besides what gun to carry.
Right.
Yeah, there was a lot of consequence too with those.
Yes.
There were points where you could choose who lives or dies.
Yeah.
And at some points there were specific mission parts that you would never see if you had killed somebody. You could go without finding a kill switch for a robot who was coming after you. You could choose to go over this lengthy shootout sequence, or just go, hey, you're dead, and then they'd explode.
Yeah, or you might find a sniper rifle and be like, wow, yeah, this is a cool weapon, I want to use this, but hey, you don't really have the greatest skills for making good use of it, so you try to aim with it, and it's just like...
There were 3 different
all over the
endings,
place.
and I remember the game being very long as
Yeah.
well. Shooters now are 8 to 12 hours.
Right.
This was a game that I recall, it was 30 to 40 hours. It was an epic endeavor. I remember, funny story for me, one of the games we're going to talk about next, Diablo II.
Yeah.
I was so excited for Diablo II because I love Diablo 1 that I actually, believe it or not, Deus Ex and Diablo 2 came out within 2 weeks of each other.
Yeah.
So I didn't buy Deus Ex right away, and then I saw the reviews and all the critical praise. And when I finally got to Deus Ex, which was about 6 months later, it was all I could think about as I was playing it. I remember working in my college, I worked in the computer department at Staples for my college job. And I'd be working the night closing shift, and there'd be really nobody around. And I would wander off, just daydream. I would be thinking about Deus Ex and everything that had happened the night before, and that what am I going to do next?
Yeah.
It was the game completely enveloped me in a way that few games have ever done.
That's the mark of a wonderful game. And speaking of games that ate your life and games that came out within a couple of weeks of each other, let's talk about that Diablo 2 for a second. So Brendan, what was that?
That was my Diablo 2 was my jam.
All right.
The week that it came out, I got the game, but I couldn't play it because of reasons throughout my household. But I had the manual, and back then, Blizzard manuals were a thing to behold.
Yep. Yeah.
Full color,
full of all these illustrations by Sam Wise and all these people, all this story in the back, and we even had these stories in Diablo 1 that talked about the burning hells and all of the greater and lesser evils. But we only saw Diablo. Diablo 2 gave us all these other bad guys to contend with in this huge open scenario, going from the Tristram of old all the way to the jungles and deserts, and they made them terrifying.
Yeah, yes. Diablo was a good game, but it's like you pointed out, they expanded on and cleaned up a lot of things. They added run, they fixed how gold worked. You couldn't write your name in gold.
More character classes, the acts were huge. It was endlessly replayable. I still think Diablo 2 is the greatest action RPG of all time.
I don't
think it's arguable. I think it just is. And the thing is, what's interesting though about Diablo 2 is that because of the benefit of history, we now only remember it as we last saw it, which was with Lord of Destruction and with all these patches that they added.
Yeah.
When the game first came out, totally a terrific game. But they added the synergy system and rune words and so much of the end game of what Diablo 2 became. Everyone looking for that for what they needed, the runes to form Enigma. Yeah, and have Enigma body armor so you can teleport around everywhere.
But all that came along because they supported it for so long.
Oh, they did.
They supported it forever. Necromancers, frankly, were broken. My favorite class, but they were useless after the first act or two in the original build.
Okay, a summon necro was useless after the first two acts, and I learned that.
Which is the whole point of having a necromancer is the skeletons.
I was fine. And here's the funny thing about me with Diablo 2 is that I min-maxed a corpse explosion build. This was before it was cool.
Yeah,
believe me, guys, it was cool at some point.
Corpse explosions have always been cool, Vince. I'm calling bull on this one.
But I had this build before it was the build for them.
Right.
But it was in the early patches, and I steamrolled everything until Diablo.
Right.
And then one wave of his fire ring attack literally wiped out all of my skeletons, all my summons.
Barbarians for life. And I spent
barbarians.
There was a rare item called Messerschmitt's Reaver that I spent so much time looking for, and at some point I eventually got it with my buddy Robert. In fact, with my Diablo 2, I played on Battle.net, but I would actually, this was back in the day, I would haul my whole computer setup, the tower, the keyboard, the mouse, the CRT monitor, because this is in the CRT days. And 3 friends we'd go anchor down at my buddy Robert's house on weekends, and we would just pull all-nighters just playing Diablo 2. And it is some of my favorite memories of all time.
You mentioned that rare item. Another thing to think about, the item balance was incredible. When you found an item, it had the prefix and then it had something there at the end, and those two things, they weren't necessarily good for your build, but you're there's a way this could be used.
And you give it to your friend.
Exactly. And there was no useless junk dropped, really. There was always something I see how this could have a good application. That was so well done. Also, the importance of moving character server side. I mean, there was a lot of cheating in Diablo, but it did help quite a bit with that. And then, of course, the most important thing, taking its cue from Twister, Brendan. There's also Brendan's favorite level.
Wait, what?
The cow level.
The cow level.
Yeah.
I don't know how that's got my mind, but I remember in Diablo 1, it was always a point of contention where if you clicked on the cow, they would moo and you'd say things like, is there a cow level? StarCraft came out, a cheat code, there is no cow level.
Yeah.
Diablo 2, There's a
cow level.
Cows with axes and halberds.
Remember what? You could fill up your entire inventory with gold and actually have like, all right, I need to spend this gold now.
I have to buy
So
this.
you gotta go to Geeks and start gambling.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that cow level was crazy. It was for a long time. It was one of the best runs you could do. Like the cow level was.
You know what?
Was a great run
Show's
to do.
over. Let's go play Diablo.
But we can't yet because at the same time, Diablo II was coming out.
By the way, real quick,
Yeah.
final point.
Yeah.
Deus Ex and Diablo, I mentioned they came out within 2 weeks of each other. Both came out in June. Nothing comes out in June anymore. I mean, with like the notable exception of The Last of Us, which was Game of the Year award, Batman. But it's like
delayed.
June is tends to be a desolate month. Two of my personal favorite games of all time, Diablo 2 and Deus Ex, both out in June within 2 weeks of
And
each other.
actually, also in June for the Dreamcast, Marvel vs. Capcom 2.
Like I said,
Hey, Vince.
I'm gonna take you for a ride.
Absolutely fantastic. The just spectacular music in that game. And the last thing in the world you expected when you started it up. But yeah, came out on the Dreamcast in June.
A beautiful, beautiful system that's very near and dear to my heart for many reasons.
So why should we love Marvel vs. Capcom 2?
So the thing about Marvel vs. Capcom 2, more than anything, in terms of numbers, okay, fighting games at this time generally have like 15 characters, 20 characters, maybe at most. Like there's other games in the Versus series. Then Marvel vs. Capcom 2 comes in and just tips the scale at 52 characters. Even today, no fighting game launches with that many characters. Like maybe like Street Fighter 4 now near the end of its life in Ultra, having added characters is like close to that, but it's still not 52.
That's what
characters.
happened when you popped the disc in.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If 52 characters, has anyone ever gone through and assigned them like deck of cards?
Oh,
Numbers
wow,
like,
yeah,
Who
there's-
would the 4 aces of Marvel vs. Capcom be?
Okay,
Who
so
would be
the-
the kings, the queens,
All
the
right,
jacks?
So the aces,
the Joker.
So the aces will be Storm, Magneto, Sentinel, and Cable.
There you go.
That would probably be the ones you'd call because those 4 characters, especially the first 3 I named, made up the. So by the end of competitive Marvel, because Marvel, it comes out in 2000,
Right.
and this is kind of like as we were talking before, this is kind of the end of the boom of fighting games as a mainstream thing. That started really with Street Fighter 2 in the early 90s.
MVC2 and then maybe Soul Calibur 2 is kind of the last gasp.
Yeah, it's the end of those being like mainstream popular, but at the same time, it was a boom. It was a booming time in a lot of ways for the competitive scene.
Right.
This is where Justin Wong establishes himself as a legend, dominating the game for 10 years.
Yep.
And it had a healthy meta that just kept evolving and evolving and evolving. And the amazing thing about this is the exact opposite of Diablo 2. So when we talk about Diablo 2 getting better and better because of all of this support from the developer, Marvel vs. Capcom 2 became a better and better game, not from support from Capcom, because there weren't patches. It was a console game. You didn't patch it. It became better because people discovered things, they refined things, they experimented, they put together different combinations of characters you never would have thought of.
And they could do that because it was such a gloriously unbalanced mess. I mean, that's the thing about MVC. MVC2 it's just an absolute grease fire. Except that the smoke that rises up from it is just so succulent.
So good. It
yeah,
smells so
it's
good.
such a great game.
And that's the thing is that people, as the fighting game guy here, people often come to me and they come with the assumption, and it's an understandable one. Oh, like people who take fighting games seriously and like pros and stuff, they want the most like balanced game. Like so, Street Fighter 4, Super Street Fighter 4 was probably the most balanced version of Street Fighter 4.
Yeah.
And pros hated it. It was boring. Everyone looks back at Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and they go, it was a silly broken game with a bunch of weird glitches and infinites and moves that did inordinate, like Tronbon, from the the Adventures of Tronbon.
Yep.
She was in that game and she wasn't a great character on point like in the game, but if you assigned her, one of her assists was this little like sonic ring laser that just inexplicably did like 20% of a character's health bar just by hitting you with it. So you would just work it into a combo and like you didn't even need to use a super. It was just like you just did a bunch of stuff and then comboed into the assist, and for whatever reason it just did like silly amounts of damage. But my big thing that I remember about my big story, if I can give one, with Marvel is that it was the first time I looked at a game and said the software is the software, but 2 people can be playing an actually different game. Like, I thought I was really good at it.
Yeah.
I had a really well optimized team, and I played Jill Valentine, Captain Commando, and Cable was my team. Cable was my anchor, and I put together a tournament because I ran a video game club in college, and I put together a tournament, and everyone was like, "Oh, Vince is gonna win, but we should all play and it'll be fun." And this one guy named Chad had gone online. I'd never done this. He went online and he looked up videos of what the pros were doing.
Okay.
And he didn't have the execution to like do their combos. What he did know how to do easily was he knew how to play Sentinel.
Yep.
So he took Sentinel, he would fly, he would go to the top of the screen because the camera would follow him. So all that was on screen was Sentinel up in the air, and then he would just call his assists.
Over and over again.
And I'm just literally just having to block things that I literally can't see them.
Yeah.
And the match went for like the maximum time limit, and I almost tagged him, but I'd never seen anyone, I never even thought of breaking the game in that way.
And there were so many different ways to do it.
Yeah.
And that's what made it fun. Yeah, that's it. Chad, if you're watching,
This is
you
Chad.
broke things. There we are. So moving on from Marvel vs. Capcom and moving into motion picture territory, this is also the year that Bryan Singer brought us the original X-Men.
That's right.
And
I'll never forget it.
No, this is a movie that's close to home for me. I went to see this on opening night in a room full of people that were there to see an X-Men movie. There were a lot of question marks because superhero movies were much more missed than hit back then.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, by far.
You walk in and this is Bryan Singer who's done Usual Suspects, and then you go in to watch this film and that opening sequence with Magneto in the concentration camp, reaching out to his parents, the bars curving.
Yeah.
And
That was powerful.
Yeah.
That's so powerful.
I was just like, this guy gets it.
Yeah.
And wow.
He knows what matters about these characters.
Perfect casting in that film.
Oh yeah.
Whether it's Hugh Jackman, Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart, even Anna Paquin, Rogue.
Yeah.
I mean, all the leads were just brilliant.
And every time that McKellen and Stewart shared the screen,
it's
it
just
was
like-
it was electric.
And this is back before we thought of Ian McKellen really as a geek culture dude. I mean,
Right.
now everybody
Let's
had
see,
wanted
was that-
Patrick Stewart.
Was that pre-Gandalf?
That's pre
Oh,
Gandalf.
it's pre-Gandalf.
Yeah, that's
Fellowship
pre-Gandalf.
was what, 01?
Fellowship was after this. Yeah. So this is pre Gandalf, and here we have this guy, and he looked incredible for the part. We'd seen him in other movies, but
Yes.
for him to play Magneto, and then everybody wanted Patrick Stewart as long as people had dreamed of an X-Men movie. Hugh Jackman was a controversial choice.
Yeah, he was.
We didn't know much about him.
He wasn't the first choice, as I recall.
I don't know who they were actually considering. There's a lot of things that get thrown around for different people, and who knows how much of that's Hollywood hearsay. But there was a lot of, and from that first scene on, just they're in the cage.
Nailed
and,
it.
Yeah,
and the thematics, like, Singer understood that. Singer got that X-Men is about racism in America, like and classism in America. Like he got that, and he made that kind of the thematic focus of the film in this really really intelligent way. And then also posed the question is like, what do the oppressed do?
yeah. X-Men.
What is the right path forward for the oppressed?
to respond to that? I agree. Stan Lee and the other developers at Marvel that worked on X-Men, I mean, that was their way in the 1960s of talking about the subject of prejudice in a very covert, powerful way that would reach especially young readers, I think, at that time. This movie encapsulates that spirit.
Yeah, and I'm sorry.
Sorry. X-Men also answered one very important question, and that's what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning.
Oh no!
The same
I
thing-
mentioned almost perfect casting.
Just the cat.
the same thing that happens.
Ray
to
Park
everything else.
playing Toad, he of Darth Maul.
Doing a little
Phantom
spin at the top
Yep.
of the elevator. Yeah. And this movie does have some flaws. It's also, I think, it's important that Mystique's confidence on screen in this movie would become very important to the series later on.
Sure.
She doesn't actually speak all that much in this one, but she becomes an enormously important character in the movies from there on. And that confidence to walk around in what amounts to body paint and pasties and carry yourself that way, really incredible.
Yeah, she had a presence for sure. But I'll never forget that final, the very end scene with Stewart and McKellen playing chess with plastic pieces in a plastic cell, and McKellen asks that important question of any oppressed group, like, what are you going to do
Yeah.
When they come for you, like pacifism is fine, but like, what are you going to do? And he says, well, I feel a great swell of pity for the poor soul who comes to that school looking for trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which we then get in X2.
Chills. Just
Which
chills.
is an even
So
better
good.
film.
Yeah,
by
it's
the
an
way.
even better movie, but this is an awfully good one. Moving back to games.
Games.
What a year for games. Baldur's Gate 2.
Yep. Yep.
Folks, if you haven't played it, sit tight for some reverence.
I mean, BioWare's resume, again, younger viewers may not understand quite the power. I mean, they know Mass Effect, they know Dragon Age, which are great games, but Knights of the Old Republic, in my opinion, the single greatest Star Wars game ever made.
Yep. I would double down with you on
and
that one.
also just my personal favorite role-playing game, period.
Up there,
ever.
way up there for me.
And then, yeah, you go back to Baldur's Gate, which is really what defined them as a developer. And Baldur's Gate 2, or as we call it, Baldur's Gate 200 hours.
It was long, but it refined the things that they'd done in Baldur's Gate. They already had great storytelling, but some of the mechanics were kind of awkward. And had much, I feel like the stages, which were kind of huge handcrafted worlds, were better designed. This was a place where mechanical execution in an RPG and incredible writing just met at a just about perfect nexus. This was a very strong game, in addition to being a strong role-playing narrative experience.
Yeah, and considering its size, that's just an unbelievable accomplishment. Like, I can't think of a game today that is 200 hours long, is mechanically deep, and well meted out, and has an excellent story and excellent writing from top to bottom.
The Witcher 3 is probably the closest modern equivalent, right?
The Witcher 3 is probably as close as we get, and it took us, you know, this was the years 2000. It took us until
15 years.
It took us 15 years to get something that we would say is anywhere close to that. What was really amazing is the flexibility of the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons system that kind of underpinned the whole thing.
Yeah. Built off the D&D rule set a lot.
This was actually, I feel like I lose nerd credit when I say this to people, but like this was my introduction to real D&D. Like I had flirted with it before. People had like said, "Hey, do you want to try it?" And like I had a really bad DM that kind of made the experience terrible. But then once I got Baldur's Gate 2 and I had that 200 plus spiral bound tome, which I still have that back at home, that just had all the ability charts and like in-depth like descriptions of all the spells and the math behind all the spells, so that I can make my own decisions. That's when I was like just hooked on D&D.
Character creation was a huge part of the game. Like many good role-playing games, it's about what you did before you went into combat. But unlike a lot of role-playing games, the combat itself is also very satisfying. And often tense. And we're going to move on here pretty quick. But
well, one final point. I don't recall the developer publisher name, but Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 have been effectively brought back in their original forms, just on iPad and PC as well. But you can play Baldur's Gate 1 or 2 on your iPad. I think maybe $10. I don't know. I'm not doing a plug for them, but I just like. But this is recently. It is been brought back for modern platforms, so you can go experience it.
That might be the best value proproposition in gaming right now.
Probably is.
Also, if you see Kang X, the Demi-Lich, just run. I hate that thing. All right, so then moving back over to Nintendo, in addition to Perfect Dark this year, we also had ye old Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask.
What a weird and beautiful game.
What an odd chapter in the Zelda saga.
Yeah, it was. They had, I think, a year of development time and largely reused assets. You could see a lot of the familiar faces and a lot of the familiar, backgrounds and stuff. But the way they repurposed it, it was such a interesting concept. They threw the Zelda story out the window. There is no Zelda. You see her in like a 5-second flashback teaching you a song. After that, it's no. You are in a different world. You're not in Hyrule. There is a giant moon going to crash down in 3 days, and that feeling of anxiety carries through the whole game. Even if you can rewind time, you're still stuck with that moon.
Yeah, it's there always. The shadow of apocalypse hanging over you in a Zelda game, and a horrible apocalypse, world-ending destruction that you seem almost powerless to stop. I really like this game. I love when developers are faced with restrictions. In this case, they had a time limit on development, and they find a clever way to use those restrictions. In this case, creating that over and over cycle.
Like the Halo ODST of the Zelda series.
Right. No, it's
it would technically be the flip of that, by the way, but
go
with it.
No, but it's what's impressive about it too, tonally. And it's not. I'll be honest. I've said this before. Majora's Mask is not my favorite to play, or even to look at. But as an experience, as an atmosphere, like there's a sense of urgency and danger that is kind of lacking in a lot of other games. That Majora's Mask preserves from beginning to end. Like you said, you're always nervous. And like that doesn't sound. That's why it's so divisive too. It's probably the most divisive Zelda game in the sense that some people love it, some people hate it.
I think Majora's Mask is brilliant, but I can't play it. That time limit kills me.
Yeah,
anytime I try, I'm just like doki 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 doki. I'm so scared the whole time. It stresses me out.
I believe this was Anuma's first shot at doing his own Zelda.
At directing, yeah.
He worked on it Ocarina of Time, but this was his first big shot, and now he's become one of those big names, let's say with Zelda, with Miyamoto. And I think he did a really good job of just putting the story on its head, and like the way it clashes with this vibrant, colorful, happy with this deep, depressing sadness, just with the people you interact with, because they reused a lot of these people. The way they got around that was they gave them all personalities. Because you were in this town for 3 days and you saw them again and again and again, the way they interact with you really stuck with you. And you could see that, and with the final moments when the moon is crashing down, who stays, who flees, and what they're doing. Like, there's a very stoic sword master who teaches you about sword stuff. You go in the final 5 minutes, he's cowering in a corner, afraid to die.
Yeah.
And there's a postman who doesn't know if he should follow the orders and his whole life is his schedule, or if he should just run away. And like the way they handle this is it's depressing, but it's just like the emotions that go through this game.
It's a powerful melancholy. It's kind of evocative of the Windfish in that regard. You definitely see some of that influencing it. And then finally, probably the towering event culturally in gaming with the longest lasting impact that happened this year. The little thing, towering. Set it up right, because
you don't have the stand. You don't have the stand. You got to buy the stand.
That was a big deal, ladies and gentlemen. The PlayStation 2 released in 2000. Holy cow!
Yep.
The best-selling video game console of all time. Over 150 million of them out there, active for over 12 years. Kind of an incredible piece of machinery, and at the beginning, there was nothing to play on. Well, there was a lot to play on it.
It was a DVD Trojan horse.
That was it, exactly. Please expound.
Just so DVDs were just starting to come into the mainstream to replace VHS, but DVD players were super expensive, so expensive that they were more than the PlayStation 2. Again, younger viewers. Sort of same thing kind of happened with PS3 with Blu-ray, except we ended up with the HD versus Blu-ray war. The Blu-ray won, and then there was digital anyway. But the stakes were way higher. With PS2 in 2000, where Sony they were gonna get PS2 into people's homes because it was the cheapest DVD player that you could get, and it was going to give you Toy Story graphics.
Yeah, and those Toy Story graphics, that's an emotion engine. Yeah, they promised a lot, but they also, maybe not what they promised, but they delivered
a lot
quite a bit.
In terms of software.
Yeah,
in terms of the actual visual fidelity. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was still better than the other things that we had at the time, but it
Well, that first year, again, I mentioned this. Okay, so there were 29 games around launch for this thing, but none of them were good.
No, I will fight all of you on this.
No. What do you got?
Okay, so legitimately and not joking, SSX was a great game.
SSX was okay.
SSX, no.
You love SSX. Tell us why it's great.
SSX was a great snowboarding game.
Okay.
I do like 1080 better, and some of the other ones. I was big into snowboarding games, but SSX was a very approachable, very pretty with lots of nice vistas, snowboarding game. But I think we all know that, despite what you have to say, the best launch game in history is on the PS2 launch, and that's the puzzle fireworks simulator.
Okay.
Fantavision.
You gave us all that to build up Fantavision. Anyway, so why don't we talk about why this is awesome? First, you could play DVDs on it. That was a big deal.
Yeah.
Second, it helped broaden the DVD standard. I mean, honestly,
Yes.
this thing probably did as much for DVD sales for a decade as anything ever did.
Yeah.
It was affordable, it was powerful, and when people did get their head around it, you want to talk about a library. Final Fantasy X, Shadow of the Colossus, Metal Gear Solid 3, God of War, San Andreas, GTA 3, Vice City, Kingdom Hearts, on and on and on and on. I mean, this is one of the most fertile playgrounds for software ever developed.
What was the game? Was there a killer app for each of you guys? What was the game that made each of you guys buy a PS2?
Well,
I didn't.
I got
I
one.
was a Nintendo kid. Sorry.
Okay,
All right, good.
I got one at launch because I just really wanted one. But the one that was just like a lightning rod for me was the original Devil May Cry. When the original Devil May Cry came out, I lost my mind.
I was a longtime holdout, but I had to find out what Shadow was all about when I heard people talking about it.
Oh yeah.
For me, it was Grand Theft Auto 3. A
Oh,
buddy of
sure.
mine brought it over, and it changed. I was just like, I was completely blown away by what Grand Theft Auto 3 did, and then I had to have a PlayStation 2.
It was
and
a
I went out
game
and
from the
bought
future.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, it
It
was.
was a game from the
So
future.
I was a Nintendo kid, but I had the benefit of living up in the suburban lifestyle where my best friend down the street had a Sega console growing up.
Cross-pollinate.
And then
Yep.
my other friends down the street got a PS1, and so when they got the PS2, it was just like, oh, you want to come over and play Perfect Dark? Okay, I'll come over there and see what you got. And,
Absolutely.
well, you got no games, well, I guess we'll just watch some movies, I guess. But they did have some great things that made it really hard to be in that console fanboy war in the playgrounds because it was really, they had some really good titles. I mean,
It just kept going.
Shadow of the Colossus,
Oh my gosh.
I was just like, man.
Well, and the PlayStation 2 sort of, in a way, I mean, it was already in development, but we kind of wouldn't have an Xbox without the PlayStation 2 because on my show, Unlocked, I had the 3 Xbox bosses on there. Seamus Blackley, the creator, Peter Moore, who came after him, and Phil Spencer now. And Peter Moore talked about how, like, part of the whole thing with Xbox was to keep Sony from taking over the living room.
Yeah. Between this thing and the Dreamcast, which was kind of their little playground for fooling around with ideas, both of those contemporaneous consoles had a lot to do with Microsoft blasting into that market.
Yeah.
And we owe the modern gaming space that we have right now was created largely by this.
Absolutely.
Little
Like one last thing I did want to add on the PS2 is because, like, you know, where the PS1, a lot of games came out that started pushing video games into the mainstream in a very big way, and because of that momentum that they built with that, the PS2, I remember this, like when it came out, the PS2 was the first console that was like a technological lust object for people outside of the gaming space. Like, people were like, "Oh, did you see it? Did you hear about it? Did you get one this Christmas?"
Look at that design, that upright or vertical or horizontal, and that blue LED. I think that sold as many of these as anything ever did.
You're here.
So, year 2000, huge year for games. All kinds of other things we didn't have time to cover. Phantasy Star Online, Skies of Arcadia, Final Fantasy IX, Jet Grind Radio. That was the year of Gladiator, the year of Unbreakable, the year of Jackass, all kinds of other amazing things. But we're moving into another year now, 2001. We hope you'll join us for the next History of Awesome, where among other things you'll probably hear about Final Fantasy X, Metal Gear Solid 2, Grand Theft Auto 3, Lord of the Rings, the GameCube, the Xbox. Not a bad year either. So thank you guys so much for doing this today, and thank you so much for watching the History of Awesome. See you next time.